In the week that saw both President Biden and former President Trump pitching to the auto workers of America, the time has come to note how central a role the transition to an electric vehicle future is starting to play in the politics of America and of the UK and of the EU. This one point of focus, with an attempted rapid change to a far-reaching status quo, perhaps symbolises how what were once fringe environmental issues have now become solidified into the political battleground of the future. So let's have a look. In the US, of course, it's all in the context of the coming 2024 presidential election. And somewhat inconveniently for Joe Biden, the context also of the current unprecedented industrial action being undertaken by the UAW, targeting the three big US legacy motor companies at the same time. There are picket lines at 40 different plants, with workers demanding, some would say optimistically, that they should get a 40% pay increase, along with more time off. The argument is that they need to make back the losses they suffered during the Great Recession. Why is that particularly inconvenient for Biden? Well, more than any other president, he staked his whole identity as being the union guy. He was Scranton Joe, who was going to help unions expand, to re-emerge as the centre of America's middle class. He would be the most pro-union president in history. That promise was at least part of what got him over the line. In 2016, Trump won Michigan, albeit narrowly, showing his appeal to a lot of disaffected labourers who didn't see much common cause with the Democratic Party face of Hillary Clinton. In 2020, however, Biden took Michigan back, somewhat less narrowly, in fact. So, was this the Democratic Party returning to its roots? You know, when the parties of the left were there to represent the workers in power, to make sure that they weren't exploited or left behind by a system primarily focused on wealth creation? Well, not quite that simple. Because even if Biden still retained that strong streak of loyalty to the idea of organised labour, much of the left had realigned around more liberal voters who wanted to see action on a number of issues, including climate change. So Biden tried to embrace both. Surely possible, since tackling climate change is in everyone's interest, including the people who see more immediate problems in their lives than climate change, but it's certainly a lot more complicated. Biden promised to be the president that made decisive moves to tackle the issue, and that meant being the president that would start moving the United States away from fossil fuels. This would be good, Biden argued, because the climate agenda was also predominantly, as far as he was concerned, a jobs agenda. When he heard about climate, he said, he heard green union jobs. Not exactly how it's working out, however. For one thing, when it comes to the auto industry, electric vehicles, EVs, need fewer workers to build than traditional internal combustion vehicles. EVs are just inherently simpler, at least in terms of the hardware. But that's only part of it. Tesla is one of the powerhouses for electric vehicles. It is non-unionised. Companies like Hyundai that are coming into the US to build vehicles, they are going to the south, to states that are hostile to unions. The companies that build the batteries on which all those new electric cars will depend, likewise going south to non-unionised arrangements. So green jobs there may be, particularly since the government has thrown eye-watering amounts of money at incentivising them. But union jobs? Not so far. Now, the workers are looking to improve their pay and conditions. The companies they're targeting are in something of a bind. I mean, those companies almost buried themselves in the recent past with massive burgeoning pension fund liabilities and multiple ways they found to make themselves uncompetitive. They presumably believe that paying their people 40% more for less time at work, would probably put them straight back in that position, making them easy pickings for the like of Tesla and all the other challenger companies. Biden's response to the dilemma has been to throw his weight completely behind the UAW. Against the advice of some of his aides, he went to become the first president, so far as we know, to join a picket line. Wearing a UAW hat, he threw his support behind the union's position against the Detroit's firm management. And the UAW theory on this is that if only they can get this deal through for big three companies, this will then mean that the contracts they agreed there can be taken to the new EV companies as the incentive to get the workers there to unionise as well. Now, you'll have your own view on how likely that outcome would be in practice, but that's the story they tell themselves. The UAW is happy to have Biden's support, and they get that he's kind of with them in spirit, but that don't cash no checks on its own. They want concrete action, preferably in the form of legislation that helps them. And they're disappointed enough right now that they've been withholding their endorsement of Biden as a candidate for 2024. Biden did, of course, get a major feature into the draft Inflation Reduction Act that would have provided a sizable bonus tax credit for companies hiring unionised workers. However, it's kind of rather the case in point, because that particular measure got stripped out of the bill at the last minute in the negotiations with Joe Manchin. So that counts as a fail. And this is Biden's dilemma. His pitch is that he will provide green unionised jobs, but never mind the excuses, the ifs and the buts. If he can't deliver on that promise, no doubt he will take the blame for it. And then you have Donald Trump. Trump also gave a speech this week to auto workers. Now, he says the UAW should endorse him, but nobody, least of all Trump himself, believes that that's on the cards, and that doesn't matter. Trump's central message, as it was in 2016, is designed to go over the heads of the UAW leadership and to appeal directly to the workers themselves. Like he did in 2016, where he told the coal miners that Trump digs coal and he would turn back the clock and bring coal back to the centre of America's energy strategy. And like he also did in 2016, where he promised he would bring steel back to America to reverse time and make things as good as they were before. Neither of which happened, of course, because turning the clock back, it's not easily within the purview of a single president. But now he is promising to auto workers, unlike Biden, who's in the process of, quote, destroying the US auto industry and handing it over to China, he will save it. And specifically, he will save it from having to convert to producing electric vehicles. Freed from concerns about climate change, Trump is able to champion the internal combustion engine as though nothing has changed in the world. Nostalgia alone can make America great again. Don't underestimate the power of that. Compared to Biden's complex trade-offs and apologetic inability to get concrete benefits for the unions that he supports, Trump's message is viscerally simple. Your industry, your job, is being threatened by all this green madness, and I will save you and keep things the same. Not that he's necessarily supporting the objectives of the current strike. He says they're striking about the wrong thing. Instead, they should be fighting to save their industry, because all the jobs will go to China unless they do. There's something worth noting in all of this. The coal miners, they knew that their mines were going to close. That was an existential moment for them. So when Trump came along and promised to turn the tide, well, many of them will have thought, we may not believe him, but what have we got to lose? That actually is not the situation of the auto workers. Their companies are gearing up to be amongst those competing to provide those electric vehicles. They expect to be players in that future. So many of those auto workers, however unhappy they are with their current pay levels, don't get at all the argument that electric vehicles are the enemy and should be pushed back. Most of them understand that EVs are likely to be the future, and they're as happy to have jobs making them as they are making internal combustion engines, notwithstanding that all humans hate change at a certain level until they get used to the new situation. So they hear Trump and they kind of know that he's wrong, at least in the uncompromising blunt terms in which he has a habit of talking. Does that mean that they support Biden and they don't support Trump? Yeah, well, funnily enough, not really. The thing is, Biden spends all his time talking up the union. In his head, I assume he equates the union with the workers and presumes that the workers do as well. It's not necessarily the case. Trump, on the other hand, talks directly to them as people. Doesn't extol the union, he tells them that he's on their side. And that means that many of them, we don't have accurate polling data to quantify it right now, but we know that plenty of them feel that Trump just gets them. He's on their side and really cares about them. Biden's supporting an abstraction, Trump is supporting them. Now, whether you believe they're right to think that or not isn't the point. It only matters that they do. If it's true, as the research suggests, that voters vote more with their heart and with emotion than they do based on an analysis of their financial best interest, then right now you'd say Biden has the more difficult message. Trump won't be able to deliver on his promises any more than he delivered on coal and on steel, because the progress is worldwide. But his message is simple, powerful, and visceral. So maybe that's why a recent Washington Post poll, outlier as it may have been, gave him a substantial lead over Biden. And even if you put that poll to one side, perhaps it's why all the other polls put him and Biden neck and neck, in spite of all the hits against him the Democrats believe should have sunk him by now, all the legal indictments for January 6th stuff and so on. All of that, and yet it's entirely possible right now he could be elected once again as President of the United States. To the degree that foreign leaders, or indeed would-be leaders, are starting to be asked by journalists what it will mean for them and their countries if Trump is elected. UK Labour leader Keir Starmer says that he will find a way to make it work. So that shows that he takes the prospect as likely enough so as not to want to say anything now that could be held against him by a returning President Trump later. That's assuming, of course, that Keir Starmer can win his own battle of the electric cars. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has pushed back the deadline for the transition from internal combustion vehicles to electric. Now, he hasn't said, like Trump, that he would abolish them, but his base is ecstatic nonetheless. It's the beginning of the route of net zero, some of them believe. Seems like extraordinarily wishful thinking on their part right now, since Sunak protests that he remains committed to net zero, as indeed do a majority of Conservative MPs. But Sunak has widened his attack, going after the initiatives of some Labour politicians to introduce 20-mile-per-hour zones much more widely. A plan that is guaranteed, let's face it, to piss off large numbers of motorists. So the Conservatives will be going to the election as the champion of motorists against the Green Zealots. This, of course, is both a trap and an opportunity for Keir Starmer. He will want to distance himself from the actual Green Zealots, the campaigners gluing themselves to stuff and blocking roads. But at the same time, he will be looking to argue that if you're serious now about keeping the country on course for tackling climate change, then you need to vote for him, because the Conservatives have left that agenda behind. In doing so, he's hoping to go against the grain of momentum across Europe right now. But may have the opportunity to succeed, because the thing is that unlike Europe, the UK has had a Conservative-led government for the last decade and a half, and in recent years, that government has been a total shambles. Infighting, incompetent, occasionally eccentric to the point of absurdity. However, across Europe, government incompetence, often centrist or leftist governments rolling out climate measures, has been a catalyst for a rise in right-wing parties taking advantage of the ham-fistedness of those measures to turn people against the whole agenda. Germany has been a particular focal point as the centre of Europe's car manufacturing. According to pollsters, dissatisfaction with the EU's 2035 ban on combustion vehicles is turning the country's more centrist voters more Eurosceptic and impacting all three of the political parties in the so-called traffic light coalition government, to the benefit of the right-wing AfD. The push from the European Union to go faster in the EV transition and to try to prevent the push resulting in a surge of Chinese vehicles flooding the market, all of this is leading to major tensions and infighting between EU nations. Now, it's not only focused on electric vehicles, of course. The EU's uncompromising agricultural policies, the Green New Deal policies, have so far also been another source of popular discontent, particularly in the Netherlands most famously. The truth is that the EU's problems go deeper than the climate per se. Because look, the UK left the EU because it was the most easily affronted by the idea that Brussels bureaucrats should increasingly take precedence over national laws and lawmakers, as well as cultural preferences. The UK, of course, suffered grievously for all of that, was punished actively by Brussels with enthusiasm, but other countries are now increasingly pushing across the same dynamic. Ultimately, who governs their country? Them or Ursula von der Leyen? And as in the US and as in the UK, it turns out that climate policy, targeted as it is on some of the most difficult areas that impact on ordinary people, seems likely to become the focal point for the backlash. And it spells real problems for the European Union. In the UK, public opinion turned because politicians had been in the habit for decades of taking the credit for everything that they did that was popular, few and far between though those may have been, and then casting the blame for everything else on Europe. Now, that habit is not unique to Britain. In the current situation, for example, Germany and Italy have been blaming Brussels for expensive regulations on building energy efficiency and moves to shift rapidly from fossil fuel home heating sources. The growing populist parties in Europe have been put off the idea of leaving the EU in the short term, having witnessed the collateral damage of Brexit, but that might well make the coming backlash more of an existential crisis for the EU. Ironically, as its legitimacy gets shaken to the core by countries that now won't aim to leave, so instead will seek to restore their sovereignty by undermining its power. So why is so much happening focused on this shift to electric vehicles? Is it because electric vehicles are inherently bad? Not as far as I can tell. There are some who believe them to be inherently superior. In any case, it'll be like the transition to low-energy light bulbs, I'm expecting at least. When that transition first happened, all of the usual suspects were moaning and whining because the first-generation replacements, let's face it, were genuinely awful. But innovation comes as a response to a pain point, and before very long, the quality of the alternatives improved to the point where nobody whines about them anymore. That will happen with electric vehicles in due course. It'll take longer because a lot more infrastructure is needed. But like the auto workers Trump was talking to, there's no real objection amongst working people to the principle of it. It's the pain point along the way to getting there. The change is a lot bigger than a few light bulbs. And if you add to that the routine incompetence of politicians and bureaucrats, that pain point is going to be so much bigger. It could be just big enough to create real shockwaves that change our politics for a long time to come. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please share with anyone else you think would also enjoy it. Word of mouth is really important to us. And if you've not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? As the saying goes, that subscribe button won't smash itself.